Matt Chamberlain, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jordan. Mate, it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
I know it's been a little while since you and I have caught up, and I can't remember. Did you, yeah, I think you did come on to Smash Over Property way back in the day, which is the first podcast I ever did. So it's just been phenomenal to watch your journey, mate, and just sort of see how things have gone for you and the different avenues you've gone through, and ultimately where you've landed now is awesome. I love you sort of seeing you thrive and do and build and create your own thing. But yeah, I mean, for the listeners who maybe don't have that backstory, do you mind giving us a little life tour, as they say?
Mate, for sure. How long have we got? um, I'll do my best to shorten it, but I guess long time ago, what seems long ago now, it's about 10 years ago, maybe 11 now. I picked up the Barefoot Investor, as a lot of people do, kind of getting into their wealth creation journey. And um, the one thing I took away from that, the one I guess life lesson I took, was this concept that if you had enough money sitting in a bank account or invested in different investments, you didn't actually have to go to work. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty cool. I've only ever known people in my life who have worked, until 65 and retired, and then lived, their retirement years when realistically their bodies probably weren't really able to give them a great lifestyle at that point in their life. So I was 18 or 17 at the time, and I remember I walked into the bank just after my 18th birthday, and I said to the teller, I'd like to open up 6 online saver accounts. And she goes, "What the hell do you want 6 accounts for? Let alone an 18-year-old coming in to say that." So, and that was me kind of getting myself set up financially with my buckets and savings, and I'll put my money here and I'll put my money there. So that was the first step, and I got into shares and that, and then I ended up stumbling across another set of books, Rich Dad Poor Dad, which taught me this extra concept of leverage into your investments, and starting with a really small base, but using someone else's money to leverage into a larger asset base. And of course, you're taking on risk with that, but potentially allowing yourself to build a better wealth base in a shorter amount of time. A second thing, I'm just kind of coming across it now, is another thing that Rich Dad Poor Dad told me is you can also leverage other people's time, and it's really hard to do that if you're an employee. So recently we've kind of stepped out into being a business owner. I'm really looking forward to leveraging other people's time in the future as well, to continue creating my wealth base, so that one day I can decide whether I want to go to work or whether I want to spend more time with my family, or whatever it is. So mate, that's, I guess, the fundamentals of it, but we haven't even really talked about my working career. Should we dive into that?
Yeah, go for
um, well, so went to uni straight out of school with my bucket accounts and all that. I was working part-time while I was studying, and I had it in my mind that I wanted to buy an investment property. That was my ultimate goal. And because I was studying full time and I was working part time, I just didn't really have a really strong salary. So I thought all I can do during my study years is to save as much as I can for my deposit. And then when I start to work full time, the banks are going to start to give me some money. So that's what I did. I think I saved $150 every single week for 4 years while I was studying. And I came out into accounting, and I loved numbers, as I still do. Naturally kind of used that to my advantage to pick up a full-time gig, but quickly realized in accounting that I didn't really like the industry, and didn't get much value out of doing the day-to-day as an accountant. So that only just continued to make me super focused on saving. So I saved a fair chunk, and within 4 years of study and about 6 months of full-time work, I'd managed to save up enough for a deposit for an investment property. And I actually used a buyer's agent because I was based in Newcastle, didn't have the knowledge or experience of other markets in Australia. And I thought I've got to tap into someone else's expertise, because it could be it could have been shares, it could have been rare art, it could have been Bitcoin. As long as I was leveraging into the right asset that had the right fundamentals at the right time of the cycle in the right location, it was really important for me to get that first asset right, because then leveraging the growth of that asset into building the rest of the portfolio was really important. So I thought, let's just outsource this, which I did, and managed to purchase an investment property back in 2019. Just about, yeah, as I said, about 6 months after starting work, and that was pretty much the start of the wealth creation journey. But separate to that, and kind of coming back to what I was saying before, I just was not passionate about accounting, so I quickly got out of there as well.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's a phenomenal story. I love the classics. Like, if you haven't read those books, you have to go read them. I've read them. Almost everyone I speak to has read them, and they're amazing. And I love it, mate. I love the putting your head down, getting super focused on saving your deposit, and getting to the first one. As so we all know, the first one's the hardest one to get into. So you did well to step into that. And so tell us a little bit more. This is probably the next thing that you were going to get into, but the transition period from using a buyer's agent in 19 to getting into the buyer's agency industry and now having your own buyer's agency. Like how has that played out for you? Is it like when you used one, you were like, oh, this is a great space. I'd love to get into it. Like how did that story unfold?
It's actually crazy just reflecting now that it's only been 4 years since that happened. So I quickly worked out that accounting wasn't really the career for me, and at that time I didn't really know what else I wanted to do. I was actually seriously considering becoming a financial planner, and before I made any rash decisions, I had the luxury. My employer at the time was supporting me through a postgraduate diploma of my chartered accountancy certificate of chartered accountancy, which is a massive thing within, I guess, the accounting world, and it's a really, really solid accolade to kind of say. It gave me the confidence to say, if I'll go and give something else a crack, but at least I've got this as a fallback at the very least, and it'll allow me to be pretty employable if that ever comes. So I kind of I stuck with it for 2.5 years and got the certification, and probably about 6 to 9 months before that 2.5 year mark, I started kind of plotting how I was going to get out. And as I said, thinking about financial planning, I looked at that pretty seriously, realized that I was probably going to take another 2 years step backwards, because I was just basically going right back to the start. There's a lot to be said for the experience you get as an accountant, but it's not necessarily transferable in clear fashion across to financial planning. So then I thought, look, I don't know if I can, my aim was to get off the corporate ladder, not go backwards a few steps. So I thought, what else is out there? And as I said, I'd always been fascinated with the buyer's agency. I'd loved it from a personal perspective, and I'd actually kept in touch with the buyer's agents that I used, and they were really, really happy to share their time and their experience. And I thought, if these guys can give it a crack they're in a different state, surely I can add some value to some clients locally in Newcastle. So I managed to tap into a local network, found a buyer's agent who had established himself only about 6 or 9 months prior to meeting him. And then we worked on about a 6-month journey to getting me as one of his first employees. And I basically stepped out of accounting, super stable, respected career, into buyer's agency in August of 2020. So my family, my friends, everyone I knew thought I was the stupidest person alive, going in the middle of COVID from a super safe job into the unknown. But in hindsight, it was the best thing I could have done. So that person actually then sold their buyer's agency really quickly, probably within about 2 months of me starting working with them, to another person. And I kind of then was taken under their wing and worked under that agency for about 2 years, 2 and a bit years, until about 12 months ago decided I'll try and give it a crack myself as well.
Yeah, nice. That's amazing. Well, what a journey. And look at you now. Seems to be a big call. And, even though as scary as that time in 2020 would have been, at the same time, it's been a really cool ride and cool journey for the property market over the last, well, the 2 years coming out of COVID particularly. But yeah, super interesting. And so I suppose through all that exposure, particularly in the number side of things with the accountancies, being through, using a buyer's agent yourself, working in a buyer's agency for 2 years and now running your own one for 12 months. I'm sure you would have seen some things along the journey and along the pathway. So if you did have a philosophy now in terms of building out a property portfolio, what do you think it would be?
I actually love this question because now, if I had the propensity to buy a property, it wouldn't be the same property that I bought as my first investment. And the biggest change is that I'm in a different stage of my life than I was when I bought my first investment. I have different income. I have different equity base or wealth base, and therefore I'm either able to make smarter or more riskier choices than I did back then. So if I kind of talk through the philosophy when it started, it was, what can I leverage into that gives me balance? Because I didn't have a really good income, believe it or not. I think my highest earning potential when I was an accountant, so 2.5 years into the journey, I was lucky to be earning $55,000 a year, which doesn't go far with the banks. So the first property had to be something that was relatively balanced, and I think we purchased it for about 370,000. Pretty good yield at the time, and long story short, that served a really, really great purpose. It allowed me not at the time to not have to contribute much, if anything, and then I could focus on say my career. So fast forward, the second property we bought was the owner occupied property, so completely different approach once again. But then the third property, circumstantially, was we had a deposit, we had funding to facilitate a renovation. So I actually purchased a property and manufactured a fair bit of equity through that property because I had time, energy, and potentially, some would say a bit of local market knowledge to be able to pull that renovation and purchase together in a pretty smart way. So I know that doesn't really answer your question, but I think if I was to zoom out from the 30-foot view, the 30,000-foot view, I'd say it's still heavily focused on capital growth, but it needs to be balanced with your cash flow considerations and your time of life. So double income, no kids at the moment, that's not always going to be the case. We need to factor how we manage and hold onto our portfolio over the next 5-10 years with changes in our cash flow circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's such a critical thing is like, you can have this one pathway to building out a portfolio and, everyone has to follow this particular pathway, but it just doesn't happen that way. Like everyone's different. They've got their own story. They're in their own stages of life. They've got their own goals and aspirations and risk profiles. And there's kind of like no sort of one size fits all. So it's actually quite a good response in comparison to like, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's like, well, everyone's different and they go through different life phases and kind of needs to be reassessed at every point in the journey. But if
Spot
there
on, mate.
was something you could go back and tell yourself before you started building out your portfolio, what would it be?
It would be that buying a property today and looking at the rental yield today and putting it into your spreadsheet and making sure that it works or it doesn't cost you any money today is probably not the right approach, because things will change tomorrow. So a big driver for me in that first property was I didn't want to have to spend too much money on it. In my mind, I thought, if I buy this and I don't have to put too much money into it to hold on to it from day one, I'll just come back to it in 15 and 20 years and it'll be worth whatever it'll be worth, and I'll have that upside. But on reflecting, if I'd have made some smarter choices with the knowledge I now have, and I'd focused on potentially higher capital growth and managed negative 1,000 or a negative $2,000 or negative $3,000 gearing or cash flow, but I was able to buy a higher growing property, I probably should have done that at the start, because it would have got me further down the journey than we are today. So yeah, mate, if that was the one thing I'd say, I'd tell myself, just try and get out of the spreadsheet.
Yeah, over analysis, right? It's just like you can have analysis paralysis two ways. Sometimes it can stop you, but sometimes it can give you the wrong confirmation signals as well. And you kind of make a decision based on looking at all the data and metrics. But if you don't take that, as you say, 30-foot view and zoom all the way out and go, well, actually, like a rental yield is really a number based on today's statistics. Like the rent's going to change in time, the value of the property is going to change in time, the debt's going to change if we refinance later on. And so you're not buying the spreadsheet, you're essentially buying a moving target, a moving asset base. And so it's all about looking at the whole portfolio holistically in the future as things change and go, okay, well, is this actually going to serve the purpose of the portfolio later on, rather than, yeah, it's okay and comfortable for now, it'll do the job sort of thing. Because as we all know, we're only all stuck by our borrowing capacity, and once we're capped out, we're capped out. We either have to sell or find a way to significantly increase our income. So it's a really, really good point. You're 2 for 2 at the moment.
Well, mate, you just said something really, really important that I didn't know. I'm glad I learnt it early enough, but in fact, Stuart brings this up a lot, that the restriction, the one thing that a purchaser doesn't have, or a property investor doesn't have endless supply of, is their borrowing capacity. So use it as wisely as you possibly can. And it's not as simple as just buying property for property's sake. You need to be really, really strategic with the quality and the fit of all of those assets within your finite borrowing capacity.
Yeah, spot on. Is that Stuart Weems?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites. He's great. Now you did mention a little bit about the portfolio. I think you mentioned you had acquired 3 along the way. And you mentioned that you wouldn't have bought the first property that you did, but is there any other mistakes or things that have come about in any of the other purchases in the portfolio that you would change or do differently or something like that?
It's a really good question. So I'll give a bit of flavor to the renovation property that we did, because at face value, it's actually not a property that I'd recommend a client purchase. It doesn't have some of the fundamental capital growth attributes that if a client came to me and said, what contributes to capital growth, I'd show them my property and I'd say, not that. So, but the reason we went down that route was twofold. The first one was circumstantially, it was really valuable for my wife and I at the time to capitalize with the tools that we had. And second to that, it was an opportunity to, based on, I guess, the fact I get to be at the right place at the right time for my clients, I've also had the ability to do that for myself. And this particular property was just such a favorable purchase price that it made sense to buy the wrong asset, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
So we can talk through it. So I bought a property on a train line that is subject to a lot of noise, and it's not in the most desirable area of that suburb. And traditionally, we'd say to our clients, if you're looking for long-term capital growth, you want to buy something and come back in 20 years, try and avoid your train lines and your main roads as a bare minimum. So firstly, broke that cardinal sin. But the reason it made so much sense is because we were actually able to, number one, negotiate a really favorable price in a very fast-paced growing market, which was what were we, August 2021. And the vendor wanted a long settlement. She had some circumstances around that required that. So what we did is I went to my mortgage broker and he said, yep, we know what you can get financed. You're going to need this income by very close to the settlement date for us to be able to get your finance. And we've got probably 5 lenders we can go to if we can move things around. So I got the big tick from the broker, but I actually didn't have the deposit on, when we first purchased the property. So I was basically kind of like using future money to buy the property today, which allowed us to get into the property with a really, really low, at least at the start, really, really low deposit. And we're able to own the property through the settlement period, which was actually in a growing market. So we were able to capitalize on the growth of the market without actually having to pay the mortgage on the property. And by the time that the property settled in 6 months' time, we had enough to settle the deposit and we had enough to complete the renovation. So we then renovated the property in about 3.5 months. And that property is in a suburb which has a median rental yield of about, I'd say, 3.8 to 4%. And we're currently earning on cost, we're earning about 4.9% rental return. And we've also seen we've doubled our money. So every dollar that we put into that renovation, we've actually received $2 back in terms of the valuation on the property. So it's worked really well in a short period of time to extend our, let's say, our wealth base. But if I were to then, the longer that goes on, because that property is not necessarily a high growth property in the future, the value in that property is slowly diminishing.
That's it's such a crucial element. I think a lot of people analyze, as we were saying before, like these properties just based on the numbers on today. What's the result we can do? Can we buy it under market value? Can we renovate? Can we get our money back out again? And look at it in isolation, but then they quickly get to 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line and go, well, yeah, it really served me for the first 6 to 12 months when we did everything, but it's kind of just been stagnant or hasn't grown at the same rate since we've purchased it. And I think it's one of those critical things is like, yeah, it's all well and good to increase your asset base now and your wealth base now, but in 5 or 10 years time, is it going to continue to serve that purpose or has it already served its purpose sort of thing? So, yeah, it's a really, really crucial one and I love it. Now we've already touched on it a little bit just in terms of you moving into the buyer's agency space. But from a perspective of, getting into the space and then actually starting your own buyer's agency, like I'm such a massive fan and advocate for everyone getting out and having a crack at their own business. It's super liberating. It's about 1,000 times more work, but it's also for me, it's been super enjoyable and I get a lot more out of, pursuing my own passions than pursuing someone else's passions. And so for you, what was that? Was there like a light bulb moment or was there something in particular that happened and triggered you to go, actually, I want to give this buyer's agency thing a bit of a crack myself? And what did that look like for you?
It's I think it all started probably when I was very young. My dad was a self-employed and he had a business where he never had big ambitions. He worked really hard, but he did have an employee and they worked together for 20 or 30 years. So I saw let's call it the benefits of being a business owner, but also the other side. And that was that dad would often work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. So he sacrificed a lot, but it also helped me see that he created a lot of choices for himself and his family. And I've felt that going through school, then uni, and as an accountant, that I always wanted to become my own boss. And I often would say to people who would ask, I just don't know. I just haven't found it yet. And transitioning into the industry, coming fresh into the industry, the safest way in my mind was to learn from someone else, gain the skills under someone else's guidance, and let's call it their risk, and then when I felt confident enough to give it a crack, it just seemed like kind of the natural next progression for me. So yeah, I'd say it started. I think I always knew I was going to probably become my own boss. And after I found buyer's agency as like a true passion of mine, it just seemed right to naturally go there. And we're 12 months in. I'd love to have this conversation in another 12 months, but at least so far, it's definitely been worth it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm a massive advocate for it, and I'm glad you did, because you can build what you want to build. You know, your branding, your processes, your clientele, and really pursue it that way. I love it, mate. It's amazing. Now, there's 1,001 of them out there, but if you had one favorite property one liner, what would it be?
You can't spend equity.
Nice.
So
I like it.
I guess going starting to think a little bit more about what happens when you've acquired your asset base. Certainly not there yet, but I guess my life up until now, it's all just been about acquisition. Find, build, release equity, find another. But now with life changing, goals changing, and the rest, I've become to realize that you can't. You probably could spend equity, but the only way to do that is to continually feed future borrowings with higher income. And if you've got really high income from your day job, then you probably aren't needing to spend the equity that you have in your portfolio. So it's become really relevant to me, more recently, that there does need to come a point in your portfolio where your growth has done its part, and it's now starting to transition to different types of assets, which are going to then be more income producing, which will be the true, let's call it, release from your time being connected to your ability to earn income. And that's, for me, where we want to be. So we'll either need to sell an asset to and then spend the cash sitting in the bank, or we can leverage into more cash flow related assets, let them pay themselves down, and then we get to a point where the cash flow is supplying or paying for our lifestyle.
Underpinning the portfolio, yeah, it's a really, really crucial one. It's definitely something that we see quite often, is that transition from growth to, continuing to build the portfolio, then getting stuck in terms of borrowing capacity, and then it's like, well, what do we do? And growth serves its purpose as you go through that acquisition window, but then ultimately you need to, if you're heading into retirement and actually want to replace an income, you can't do that on yields at 3.5%, 4%. It needs to be something much higher, and that's income focused. So so it's amazing. I love the one liner. You can't spend equity, and it's very, very true. It's not free money. It's still debt, and the more debt you add to the portfolio, the longer it's going to take to pay off. So it's a really, really good one. Well, mate, maybe we should do this again in 12 months and see where you're at and see how things are going. But thank you so much for coming on today.
Beautiful, mate. It's been a pleasure.
No worries. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.